This is TWiT.
What do we all think about Apple saying, well, we're not going to keep developing Aperture in OS X? We all heard at WWDC that the new Photos app was going to basically be the successor to iPhoto, but it sounds like it's going to be the successor to Aperture as well, which I guess means that it is more of a pro tool than anything that we've seen before on the OS X side. But I don't know, Andy, were you a big Aperture user?
Yeah, I mean, I spend more time in Aperture having fun than gaming or watching movies, probably. It's just such a slick app for turning the photo that your camera shot into the photo that is the scene as you remembered it. So I, like most people who are using Aperture, kind of disappointed that for the past couple of years we haven't seen any movement from it. Being not a pro, I wasn't really tempted to move to Lightroom yet. So it's not as though it was something that people were not expecting, but you're still sad once the shoe drops. But I'm not sure if it's necessarily that Photos is going to replace Aperture. I think I wrote a column about this a few days ago when the news finally hit, that it's possible that Apple has another app that is a replacement for Aperture, but they're not ready to announce it yet. Or it's possible that they simply think that because Photos is so extensible, someone can come in and write an extension that can deliver Aperture style editing into the Photos app. Or it's possible they're just saying that, look, we're totally redoing Photos for Mac OS. Photos is not just a replacement for iPhoto. It's not just your photo library. It is going to be the resource that's going to deliver photos everywhere that every app and every user wants it on every device, no matter whether you're using mobile or desktop. So it's possible that Apple is just saying that we're going to retract our responsibility to just making sure that any app that works with Photos can get their hands on whatever photo the user wants to start working with. And so we're going to leave that as an opportunity for others. I mean, do remember that Apple never got around to creating their own version of Photoshop. So just because they're not doing a pro app for Photos doesn't mean they don't care about it. But still, yeah, I'm wondering if it's time to finally start taking advantage of that part of my Adobe Creative Studio subscription now. Yikes.
Well, Alex, I know you do a lot with professional photography. I mean, was Aperture ever enough of a program for you?
Yeah, no, I actually have been using Aperture almost since day one. So so it's definitely, well, actually since day one, and that's where most of my apps are. 100,000 photos or something in there, or media files. And there have been some stability issues that have actually had me a little concerned about the about Aperture in general. So I haven't been sure if that's where I was going to stay. I'm going to wait to see Photos before I decide what I'm going to do. I think that there's a lot of it's hard to see until we see it, but I don't know if I'm using Aperture even heavy enough that if there's a lot of those features get put into Photo, and I wouldn't say that I'm pushing Aperture very hard for the corrections that I do. I think that they could definitely put most of that into Photos, and I'd probably be pretty happy. Anytime I want to do anything serious, I move to Photoshop anyway, so it's not been that big of a deal. Maybe I should be in Lightroom. I don't know. Many of my friends are. so I'm still trying to figure that out. So, anyway, I think that I'll be interested to see it before I make a decision. I also think that there's still an opportunity for Apple to make it extensible enough that people could start adding a lot of plugins and so on and so forth, and open up that API to a point where people could actually do something really useful, like replace some of the functionality of Photoshop. So there's a lot of opportunity there right now.
I guess I'm probably one of those. Well, I know there's a few of me, but I almost do all of my photo taking on my iPhone and then my photo editing on my iPhone. I'm never really an iPhoto. I don't even know if I've ever used Aperture. I've probably looked at it here and there, but I'm not even sure what my options are going forward or what my best option is. Rene, obviously, at least what we are to expect from the new Photos app. Is it something that you think is going in the right direction for Apple? Do they just want to move away from this sort of pro photography universe that they know don't appeal to a lot of people?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. I think for a while now, the writing on the wall was fairly clear that Apple didn't care about pro user features as much as they cared. I mean, that's right, power user features as much as they cared about empowering user features. They wanted to make apps starting with iMovie, starting with Final Cut Pro, even Logic Pro 10 to some extent, that were accessible to a wider range of people, sort of the growing prosumer market, which is this huge middle ground in between brand new people to the platform and pros. And I, like Alex and Andy, I've been using Aperture for a long time, but I've been using Photoshop for decades. So my biggest Aperture action is right-click, edit in Photoshop. I just used Aperture because I liked the way that it organize things, and I didn't like the workflow that Lightroom tries to impose on me. I didn't need Lightroom specifically. So I think this move, one of the biggest complaints I've heard over and over again is that iPhoto just wasn't enough. It had okay features, but it wasn't really what everybody wanted. It wasn't that sophisticated. And now it looks like we're getting the 80% of the stuff that Aperture does really well put into the new Photos app. And yeah, the 20% that power users really wanted won't be there, but they do have other options now. And I think Apple is always better served when they're sort of democratizing computing technology, and that looks like what Photos is going to do again.
Yeah,
I definitely think that Apple is always. I mean, we've talked about this in the past, but Apple's really like, what will 90% of the people need 90% of the time? And I think that what we get with Photos is probably Apple's assumption of that necessity, and I think that they're quite happy to lose the other 10% to Lightroom if they need to.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And it's also interesting to think about what kind of future iWork might have, given that it was really created so that Apple would have a plan B if Microsoft ever decided to sort of ease back on development of Microsoft Office. Now that that's not really an issue for them, maybe a year from now, 2 years from now, 3 years from now, we'll have exactly the same thing. We'll have a year and a half or 2 years of no serious updates. And then they'll, after sort of encouraging, instead of kicking people out of the nest, the mama bird just doesn't come back to the nest very often. And then after a year, the baby birds decide that, okay, I guess mom's not coming back. Damn it, we'll have to leave now and go find our own food from now on. So this is, I think, maybe Apple's best way of encouraging people to not rely on them for the real hard stuff.